Welcome to the Into AI Safety podcast, where we discuss the challenges facing the field of AI safety and those who work within it. This show aims to provide the foundation and resources needed to get up to speed on safe and ethical AI. As always, I am your host, Jacob Hames. This interview was recorded on November 25th, 2025, and asides were recorded on December 20th, 2025. During the podcast, you may hear this sound, which denotes that I have included at least one link related to the content that preceded the sound. The purpose of this is to allow for citations and providing resources without breaking the flow of conversations. As per usual, items mentioned during asides will have links in the show notes as well. Before I intro our guest for today, I do feel that it's worth mentioning I'm recording these asides with a blanket over my head in the side room of my girlfriend's parents' house, as I am traveling for the holidays and I wasn't able to finish writing the asides before leaving. I just thought that would potentially provide a nice visualization whenever you hear me pop in. Anyways, today we're going to get into a topic that I'm super passionate about, the meta-assessment of LLM benchmarks and evaluations, and I am incredibly privileged to have a researcher who is both a key contributor to the space and someone I've gone to for advice a number of times. His career has gone all over the place, from working on wildfire modeling for policy in his PhD, to working on energy-efficient neural networks for a startup, and even starting the AI Incident Database, a resource that I've mentioned on this show in previous episodes as a great resource for understanding current, real-world harms from AI. We actually met at AIID 2025 in a workshop, and when I asked if we could have a chat, I had no idea that I had already referenced his work. He's now launching the AI Verification and Evaluation Research Institute, or AVERI, a frontier model auditing nonprofit, which we discuss a bit in the interview. We'll also cover how the AI industry is drunk on progress, many fundamental problems with how we understand the capabilities of AI systems, and how to make those systems a bit more reliable. With that, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Sean McGregor.
Hi, I'm Sean McGregor, joining you from deep underneath the Harvard Law School. I am a machine learning safety guy and cover a lot of ground, and looking forward to this conversation with you.
Awesome. And in one sentence, what's broken about how we measure and evaluate AI systems, and how do we fix it?
In one sentence, huh? We'll just say everything. More finitely, I would say we have spent much of the last 20-ish years optimizing machine learning systems from data, and have so thoroughly destroyed any notion of measurement that we have powerful systems that have a capacity to be characterized. And that is a great big problem for everyone, because we need the ability to scientifically understand these systems.
All right. Let's take a step back maybe and talk about how you got to where you are. You did a PhD in machine learning for public policy. And before everyone's, yes, that makes sense. Perfect. This was in 2010. Yeah. So this was a bit before the current AI summer, so to speak. Let's talk about AI summer. Similarly to most terms in the AI space, it isn't the most straightforward. It originates from the 1984 AAAI conference, where the period between 1973 and roughly 1980 was noted to be an AI winter, where public and academic sentiment of AI waned due to the first wave of AI not delivering on its lofty promises. Naturally, then, an AI summer is a time period where lots of effort and funding are going towards AI. Personally, I would classify 2018 through the first half of 2025 as a definitively hot AI summer. Regardless, the reason I point out that Sean's PhD is unique is because ML for public policy just wasn't something being heavily considered at the time. While the late 90s and early 2000s are not officially considered an AI winter, the time period saw much less public relevance of AI. Not only that, but machine learning was largely seen as a technical space, not one which would have contributions to policy. As far as I can tell, No formal academic programs existed until 2014, 2 years after the so-called deep learning revolution and AlexNet, and 4 years after Sean had begun his PhD.
How did you find this? How did you get interested in it? Why machine learning for public policy?
So I guess taking one step back from the decision that resulted in me even going to grad school for a PhD in the topic, I had finished my undergraduate degree in 2008, which was a great time to graduate from undergrad. The headlines weren't particularly happy in 2008, but I always knew I wanted to go to grad school anyways. Like, I wasn't done with schooling at that point. I was only like 1 quarter baked as a person thinking about things. And the undergraduate topic that I had been really obsessing over and for my undergraduate thesis was one that was titled something like Building the Atlas of Life. It was, how do you go about enabling citizen science to model the distribution of wildlife around the world? And I was really heavily inspired by something called the Encyclopedia of Life that was announced at that time, of trying to have these central data resources that everyone pours their data into and makes a lot of sense over the world. And so I went from that project to actually doing a research experience for undergraduates, a summer that I spent in a forest in Oregon, literally like needing to walk around deer to get to the laundry room, and no cell phone reception, but it had high-speed internet and like a really great computer lab. And I could just do like field work during the day and then go into this kind of overheated lab environment and hack on moth distribution data that we were collecting and figuring out how we could do like topic modeling and other things for different moths feeding on different food plants. I thought that was just so cool, and a combination of interests that I could actually be out in the world doing something and then come and work on the data and make sense of it. And I found that really exciting, and I finished that, and I hadn't applied to any PhD programs at that point. So like I worked for a little bit, what work I could find in the 2008, 2009 timeframe, and I applied to 3 different PhD programs, only 3, but they were 3 different disciplines. One was computer science, one was Department of Natural Resources, and one was geography. And more or less at that time, I concluded geography is interesting. Like, I really like geographic problems. This is something I've been working on, but I also don't really want to explain to everyone geography is still a thing. We haven't actually figured out all of geography yet. And Department of Natural Resources was also interesting, but I felt like my kind of core practice and discipline was something that would benefit from computing and like approaching these problems from a space of computing, because I felt like I could pick up a lot of the other elements more informally, and I could, as a matter of practice, live in natural resources, live in these public policy domains. And that the thing that would make me distinctive and make me powerful in a good way is approaching it from computing and understanding how systems are built, how to build systems, and like how to operate in those high-scale environments, high-speed environments. And this is something that very often doesn't come into the public policy space, that you don't often hybridize these 2 elements of how do you do policy and how do you do computing for policy. So I started in my first week in my grad program at Oregon State, which has an excellent forestry program, and I had a really excellent, very senior machine learning faculty member that was really foundational in building a lot of the stuff in the field. He's founded some of the journals and like the base publications that have made it work, and he's done a lot in anomaly detection, sensor modeling, all these things of real world impact. In my first week talking with him, I have these 2 projects. One of them I think was species distribution modeling related, so it's something I was interested in. Another one was wildfire suppression related. It was, a fire starts in a forest, what do you do? And how do you go about answering that question?
Put it out.
Computational. You're from a fire-prone state. You're saying, put that fire out. I don't want my home to burn down here. And I was from San Diego. Like, San Diego did not have snow days, but we did have a fire week.
Yes. Yeah.
And so like this is immediately an interesting problem to me. And this is one that, like in the full kind of computing bravado, like that you often get, particularly in AI circles, we're going to bring the computational intelligence to it, and we're going to make it better. We're going to figure out how to do this problem better.
Yeah, we're going to solve cancer.
Yes. Why not? Go after that. And that's like the exciting part about a PhD, really, is like you show up and it should be a problem that like maybe you arrive at a solution in the next 4 to 10 years. Maybe you just like incrementally move in the direction of it. But you are supposed to aim big. And so like having a sense of there's a problem in how we're managing our lands with respect to fire. So let's really figure that out. Let's build a simulator. Let's simulate this public land. Let's not do it for like just here's a fire, it spreads, and decide what to do with respect to this fire. Let's look at what happens over the course of 100 years. That this land is going to be, the vegetation's going to be growing. You're going to have changes in the land cover from fires. You're going to have these really severe events where the whole landscape might burn, or you're going to have smaller fires that create this like patchwork of different aged trees, which is really good ecologically. Let's make sense of what to do in response to wildfire. And you said suppress it?
That's not the answer though, right?
It might be. Like, and flashing forward to the conclusion of the PhD, it's complicated. Like, it's not one of there is a right answer to this particular fire. There's different preferences on risk. There's different preferences on the values that you realize from the land, whether that's timber values or breathing clean air. Or
you're saying there's trade-offs?
There's trade-offs. It turns
unacceptable.
Unacceptable. Like
I need one correct answer. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Then probably suppress the fire. I guess you're right.
My girlfriend actually comes from Kansas. They do a lot of controlled burns. And so she grew up going to prairie burns.
Drip torching?
And sorry, go ahead.
Using the drip torch and like walking along and
Well, she didn't do those herself, but they have big parties around those. They like do a cookout. It sounds horrible to me because my eyes are like super sensitive to ash, but that's a thing that they do. And yeah, I think it's pretty interesting how different approaches could have resulted in much better outcomes for fire, like the current state of wildfires. And I think we can move towards that with the work basically that you started doing there.
So the final output of this work stream of my PhD was building a visual analytic interface that allows you to actually change the values that you associate with the landscape. So if you don't care about smoke inhalation days, you could zero that out, and that actually changes very often what policy would be optimized in response to the development of the landscape subject to that policy. That was not exactly the answer you look to have at the start of PhD. It is nice if you have a headline saying I've solved wildfire, and I just had this sense of the technology I was developing is immensely powerful, can lead to really a great kind of optimization of the way that society is run. But then as soon as you bring that over to implementation, subject to the complexities of the real world, subject to the complexities of someone needs to implement it and actually do it, it just felt like it was going to break. And I always experienced this thing of when I would explain my research to people, they would repeat back how they intend on using it. I'm like, oh, you could do that, but like, you're like missing the point, or you're like not using it in a manner that's consistent with kind of like the spaghetti code I know is sitting underneath this thing, because like we were just figuring out how to even make it work initially. And I never wanted to have a sense of a land manager used my wildfire assistant and now this is a charred landscape, and the fact that squirrel no longer has a home is your fault. And I always felt a tremendous sense of responsibility for what it was I was building for that, and that while we could build and optimize these things, that handoff, that transition, how to make it actually valuable for society is something that takes a lot more time and attention than a single PhD would allow for.
Gotcha. And so then it's towards the end of your PhD, when you're having these thoughts of maybe this isn't necessarily the direction that I want to keep going, you moved to Orange County. which I looked up.
By accident, yeah.
Yeah, I looked it up, and it has the highest cost of living in the U.S. Or it's one of the, sorry, not highest cost. It's one of the counties with the highest cost of living in the U.S., with 60% above the national average. So you decide to move there, and you actually wrote a blog post about it. It ended up being an accident. Can you just give a little bit of color to that story real quick?
Sure.
That is, yeah, pretty interesting.
So I guess to set why for this whole thing first, I should say I'm from San Diego, and I love my hometown. And despite having recently shifted from Orange County to Boston and presently located in the cold Northeast, I would like to spend as much time in places like San Diego as possible. It's beautiful. I love the beaches, and it's my vibe and how it exists. Orange County is not notably San Diego. Growing up, you would say, oh yeah, LA, and then people from Orange County would say, no, we're Orange County. Completely different. And so naturally, I ended up moving to Orange County. And yes, Orange County, completely different from Los Angeles. It's not the same place. But I moved there because it was close to San Diego, and I got an opportunity for an internship that looked interesting to me. And so I arranged housing. I signed a lease. I moved there. And this is before I defended, but not too long before. It was like I was going to be seeing, is this a place that I wanted to actually start my postdoctoral career? And I walked up the first day of the internship, and this was in January, so it was like everyone returning from the holidays, and I get greeted by the HR person outside the building, and he brings me inside. I'm the first one really there to report. He sits me down in a room, and he says, so I have some bad news. You don't have a position here, and this was a bit of a shock, and I found out subsequently it was because they were cutting all contingent positions, and this was mostly like financial maneuvering of the organization. I found out it had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with what they wanted me to do. The people I was going to work for and report to reached out to me after I left the building that day, after I got my one day of pay, because I reported they have to, per California law, pay me for it. They reached out to me and were very apologetic and were trying to buy me all the meals and whatnot. So I had effectively accidentally moved to Orange County. Like, I didn't have a job there. I had a lease and was paying thousands of dollars a month for the place. And that's when I had to scramble to figure out what I was doing, because I was not I'd taken a leave of absence, or was not enrolled in grad school that particular term, because I was just going to finish up my dissertation and then enroll the following term to do the defense for the minimum number of credits. So
gotcha. So you're now in Orange County. You have a lease, so you're committed at that point. How did you go about making that not a disaster?
It feels like it. And my advice to listeners of the podcast, those looking to make it in AI safety, perhaps more than other fields, but it's, if you're good at what you do, if you know something and you proceed through the community with integrity and capacity, then usually when you are on the job market and you become available, particularly like if there's a good story behind it, hey, I accidentally live here now, what's up? They want to help you. Like, most people are good people, and they might not be able to give you a job, but they might know someone who does, or they'll be like, actually, you would be perfect for X, Y, and Z thing. And that's more or less what I did there. I started doing like some random teaching. I started just hitting the ground and talking to everyone. And actually, like, it worked out way better than if that internship had come through. I found something that more closely reflected my experience and capacities and drives, and really led me to where I am today. And I feel quite lucky to have not had that internship. So
yeah, no, it makes sense, and I would totally agree. Like, I think really you just need to start doing things. I've said this before, but I really feel like you need to choose to do something where no one else can tell you that you can't do it. Quit asking for permission, basically, with regards to your own career, at least. So yeah, that resonates with me a lot. And speaking of where you currently are, like, you've done a lot in the 7 years since then. Can you give us like the highlights? Because it is quite storied. We don't have time to go in depth into all of it, but it'd be good to get a little bit of an idea.
Sure. So I guess taking the express route on this, the thing I found when I was suddenly situated in Orange County was actually just doing consulting work. And I think that this path is probably one we're going to see a lot more commonly in the economy, is the entrepreneurial mentality of people need the things you can go from thing to thing as a result. So the first thing I did was I was the technical lead consultant for the IBM Watson AIX Prize. And the AIX Prize work was starting up something called the AI Incident Database, which was just something that needed to exist from my perspective. It's a collection of harms produced by AI systems in the real world. It's inspired by similar databases in aviation, food safety, product safety, computer security. A bad thing happens, you record it, you collectively work to make it so that it's less likely to happen again. This is, I think, a very critical modality for effective safety cultures, is to have this. You might not be able to prevent every bad thing from happening once, but you should work to make it not happen again. The Santayana aphorism of those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, I think is very important for the safety community. So I started up that project, which is something that it's the first of this list of things that I'm still working on. And then just to fast forward through time to today, I eventually left the startup, started my own startup dedicated to the test and evaluation of machine learning systems before LLMs were a broadly known thing. And so we were looking at a variety of different algorithmic decision-making systems and computer vision systems and whatnot, but the same technology worked for large language models. That startup, or at least the intellectual property associated with it, was bought by an organization, an old safety organization from 1894 called Underwriters Laboratories, UL, and went into their nonprofit organization, UL Research Institutes, pursued a public mission across a variety of impact domains, but oriented or centered on digital safety and how to make it a safer digital ecosystem. Left that position March of this year, 2025. Have been working on a combination of incident databasing, as well as, actually, since we're to current day, and I think you'll be asking me about those items, I'll let you prompt those. But that brings us to today, and carrying a few titles or wearing a few hats that all thematically align to trying to make AI safer or make society safer with AI.
Gotcha. And one thing that you mentioned when we were discussing just our pre-show discussion as something that you were thinking about recently is how you approached contributing towards safe AI, and the way that sort of went for you has had you in almost like straddling two different sides of the maybe like corporate-based for-profit safety, and then also the nonprofit, maybe more policy-oriented work. Can you talk a little bit about how you see this distinction, and would you have done the same thing again if you were given that opportunity? What would you suggest to people who are currently looking at this space and considering different ways to engage?
Sure. And I think that the way of capturing this dichotomy is saying that when you're proceeding to a career in the safety of AI or the safety of society with respect to AI, you really need to operate along one of two modes. And you can try and operate down both of them, as I have, but it makes it more interesting than I think most people would look to pursue. Those two modes are a market mode or a regulatory mode. The market mode is one that you are aligning yourself to profits, and people want to pay for things, and businesses and people working for them are supported by people paying for things. Mm-hmm. The other side of things is the regulatory mode, and this is very often looking to rein in the excesses of capitalism, and for the lack of a better term, and make it so that the market mode doesn't actually make it so that we are living in a world we don't actually want to live in. That eventually there's various forms of market failure, or there's unsafe things can sometimes be profitable. But addictive drugs are incredibly profitable, and you could make a great amount of money making highly addictive drugs. But we decide we don't want addictive drugs as a society, that it leads us to bad places, and so we try and stop their production and distribution. And when you are a person new to AI safety, you really need to decide which of these kind of two teams you're playing on. I try and sit in the middle. This is, I think, particularly important for things like the AI incident database that is meant to just be an independent collection of almost indifferent data that helps inform doing better in both these spaces. That it's not profitable to have your customers stop buying your things because it's unsafe and they don't trust your systems. It's also something that in democratic countries, you also create regulatory institutions to stop that from happening. And that's where incident data is useful to both. But if you're at a company and you find greater affinity and your job description is aligned to regulation, one of two things is going to happen to you if you're in a company that's profit motive based. You are either going to find yourself soon out of a job, or you are going to find yourself losing sleep because the purpose to which you're being called and embedded within the organization is not actually being upheld, because the invisible hand of capitalism, which I kind of picture in this particular instance as being the hand from Super Smash Brothers, is going to guide and shape you in a way that you don't find good. And you can do a lot of good in the corporate context. You can navigate that adeptly, but you just need to recognize that at the end of the day, if you want the company to make less money because it's safer and better for society, if you live in a democracy, it's best to advocate for that in public policy and try and quietly...
Doing so within the company will result in you being shuffled off and getting someone else who won't put up a fuss.
The companies have really great immune systems for ensuring that the profit motive is adhered to. And
that was the nice way to say what I said.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I say this as someone that actually does have an affinity for the capitalistic operating system. Like, I think the job of regulation is to figure out how to correct for the excesses that exist, because capitalism is just so efficient at doing what it does. And a thing you learn in AI safety is overfitting leads you to bad and weird places, and capitalism will overfit its own objective function and lead us to bad places, and regulation can bring you back.
Yeah. I guess at least my mental model of capitalism and like how it works is just like the thing that's being optimized for is profit.
Yeah.
And it does a great job at optimizing for profit. And anything else is secondary, meaning when it really comes down to it, it doesn't matter. And that includes any sort of sense of morality or anything like that. That's not to say anything with the people in those organizations, but the companies themselves, like you said, have a good immune system, have been created to be systems that optimize profit extremely efficiently.
Yeah. And the mental model that's best to proceed in if you want to not get greatly frustrated by it is, think of it as amoral, not in a moralistic sense, but in a what's orthogonal, or it's like an independent vector of morality, and that the things that have the greatest derivative power and like the capacity to change, from my perspective, is figuring out ways to apply those levers of profit to advance the case of safety. And that is a challenging, at times a frustrating proposition, but one that has profound downstream consequences. Coming back to the question on like why don't we see like a big federal database doing what the AI incident database is doing, is I think that we are likely to see a federation or a decentralized collection of incident databases that are not scoped around AI. And then there's going to continue being the AI incident database as a catch-all that networks these things and makes it so the data is shareable and you can learn across domains about what kinds of risk exists out there. that I would really like to see what we already have in aviation and food and drug and all these that do in fact index AI incidents, that we just get a lot more of those specialized databases of communities of practice that know the application domain, know the data that can be generated, and those can all be collected and indexed towards their own purposes and then shared outside their individual context. In the U.S., there's the saying of the states are the laboratories of democracy, that states each have their own laws and regulations and so forth. And different contexts that AI operates in is it's kind of the laboratory of AI safety, that systems don't very often generalize to other contexts particularly well. So when you end up deploying it in a completely novel, unexpected, or it's just not part of the data collection of the engineering of the system, you do learn something, and that's where the sharing of safety data between contexts is quite important.
Yeah, I guess that's probably like a key reason here as well why there's so many issues as well. I think I've also probably said this ad nauseum to anyone who is a continuous listener of the show, but like a very significant problem is that these systems are being created and put out there, and the idea that they could do anything is part of the selling point, and that just doesn't that can't be true.
We haven't solved the everything problem. It'll be an interesting day for humanity if and when we do solve the everything problem. But at the end of the day, and this goes back to the PhD side of things, eventually you wind up at values. That you have to reconcile different interests and decide how to safeguard the well-being and flourishing of multiple sapient people in that world. And we don't seem well prepared for a philosophical foundation for what it means to have increasingly capable machines operating in tandem with society and people making decisions on things. We haven't figured it out with exclusively people, and we're embedding all the same problems in the machines. But at least we can engineer the machines, so there's a capacity to solve problems in a way.
Yeah, but then speaking of problems, so one thing that I care a lot about in terms of my research areas and what I've looked into is the benchmarking crisis, which is, I don't think people are necessarily using this term, but I do think it's applicable here, because last year at NeurIPS, there were at least 10, probably more, a couple that I didn't see, papers that were all just saying essentially, here's how we could do better in benchmarking and in evaluating our systems. And the same is true at many conferences in the machine learning space. And the same is true this year as well. At NeurIPS, you have a paper, like BenchRisk is the sort of main title, and it's also same thing about how can we improve benchmarking. The fact that we need to do this, and we've been saying, so many people have been saying for a while now, it's been a year, which means at least 2 years, because some of those papers that were at last year's NeurIPS were started long before then, of people saying, let's reform, let's make this better, and we're still not there. How did we get, why is this the case? What are the critiques? Why is this such a problem?
Taking 2 steps back and looking at the kind of sociological factors and how we got here, we're drunk on progress. We have the ability to greatly expand capabilities of these systems in a way that just fundamentally destroys measurement. Goodhart's and all these rules that you read the first chapter of any textbook on machine learning, and they'll tell you don't do things that are widespread in the highest levels of proceedings. And the reason for that is it's just working. We're producing more and more capable systems, but we're more and more blind to the characterization of those systems. We won't see really a real solution that's implemented and that the cultural norms shift until it's actually necessary, when you have to. Other fields have had great crises in scientific understanding. Psychology, I think, was actually one that was very famous for having a replication crisis that they found most. I think it might have been the majority of psychology studies were not replicable. Like, they ran the same procedures, they did a new sampling, and they just found no statistical significance on this. If there's an effect, it's not a strong one. We're not able to find it. Like, what you found in your confidence interval is not present in this, and maybe we take a few more samplings and find that you were right 5% of the time, which means, hey, you just had a artifact of statistics and you didn't actually build the basis of knowledge. And so that's psychology, and that's real bad. And machine learning is dealing with something similar, that these benchmarks are very much associated with producing systems capable of doing the things associated with the benchmarks. But then that benchmark's not useful for measurement. Like, you trained against that thing, it's now in distribution. And the way this is typically handled in machine learning is you have a training test split, but that's just not enough at this point.
Part of the reason it's not enough is because everything is in the training split.
Certainly for the let's vacuum up all data everywhere and put it into the model, that's the case. It's not as bad for smaller models. It's not the case for smaller models, and you can assure it.
Ideally, we'd like to understand and predict how a model can handle data that is either subtly different or maybe very different from the data it was trained on. On a very high level, generalization is whether a model can maintain performance on new data it hasn't seen before. Can it generalize to new circumstances? There is also an argument to be had that true generalization can't be measured, but that gets philosophical rather quickly, so I'll avoid going down that rabbit hole. Generalization is explained, albeit in a highly technical manner, by David H. Wolpert in his 1996 paper, The Lack of A Priori Distinctions Between Learning Algorithms, where he introduces the no free lunch theorems. If you're interested, check out his paper as well as some of the more contemporary works attempting to understand and better explain generalization.
But even in that case, even in the case where it's a small model and you can verify, hey, I produced novel data and then I shuffled some off into the test set, you're still in distribution. You're still evaluating the system for data that was sampled consistent with the data that was brought into training. And the problem we're most often faced with in safety is the generalization problem. Can this handle the variation of the real world? The world changes through time. Not the data that's available to the person who's building the system very often isn't going to be the exact data environment of the user. And we don't, in a direct manner, measure that.
But it feels like we're not even trying.
We're drunk on progress. It's working for capability side of things, and it's only going to stop working when, coming back to the modes, one of two things happen. People stop buying the technology because it's unsafe, it doesn't generalize, it's very brittle, or regulation comes in and says you don't have access to the market until you solve this problem.
And I think that's what was really nope. I can't even formulate the idea here. It gets me really irritated.
Yes, it is an irritating thing. And the number of times when you just have a sense of, we all know this is here, and we just decided not to worry about it. It's among the more frustrating things working in the safety space. And you just have to be around long enough to know when there's the moment that you can move methodologically to better, when you can figure out how to balance these aims in this world we live in.
And so how does BenchRisk get us closer to that? What does it tell us, or how does it allow us to better think about at least the current state of things as is? Yeah.
To plug the thing, you can go to benchrisk.ai to see the table and whatnot. If you're at your computer and listening to this, you can click around.
Before Sean and I dig deeper into BenchRisk, here's a brief primer. BenchRisk was presented at NeurIPS 2025 by Sean and his team with the paper titled Risk Management for Mitigating Benchmark Failure Modes, BenchRisk. For BenchRisk, a benchmark is defined as, quote, a particular combination of a dataset or sets of datasets, at least test data, sometimes also training data, and a metric conceptualized as representing one or more specific tasks or sets of abilities consumed by users to inform their decision-making. End quote. This framing explicitly acknowledges the role that benchmarks already have and will continue to have in real-world decision-making such as policy and procurement. This is distinct from previous works. The paper then applies established risk management practices to the benchmark domain, identifying 6 dimensions: longevity, correctness, comprehensiveness, consistency, and intelligibility, 57 failure modes, and 196 mitigations.
The way BenchRisk works is it uses risk management processes to actually look at ways that a benchmark could lead someone to be misinformed about the nature of, in this case, a large language model or a chatbot.
Take into account a company using the benchmark to intentionally subvert someone's expectations.
I would say that's like a second order dimension on this one, that if the benchmark would lead... So it's not looking at a company repackaging a benchmark and representing it as evidencing something that the benchmark authors were not claiming it to evidence. So the unit of analysis on this is the documentation of the benchmark itself.
Good faith, essentially.
And it does presume good faith in the person writing the benchmark, which I think you can presume a little bit stronger than good faith on it, because there is actual liability that arises from people relying on benchmarks to make decisions in the real world. And if you say, we have the perfect benchmark and this perfect benchmark has said the system is completely safe, you're really putting yourself out there. That's not a thing that people...
And that's why they won't say it.
Yes. And so listen carefully about when people are publishing benchmarks, what claims that they're prepared to make from it. And so you start from that claim. If it says this system will prevent people from talking about ways of producing arson, or this system will not talk about accelerants that you could put into buildings so as to burn them down. That is a specific thing you can benchmark. You can say, is arsonist questions being filtered out or not? You can look methodologically at, is this benchmark likely to get it wrong? So is it communicated that is the benchmark communicated as being related to arson risk? And then is the data associated with the queries that an arsonist would issue into the system? There's all these things that are like a long list of things that if you get wrong, it's just not a reliable benchmark, and you can't use it to decide whether you deploy this in a context where you're worried about arson. And this is where to actually having a practice of benchmarking and like having a information ecosystem that generates reliable information about AI systems, you need to either have a strong longevity property of the benchmark, like that you've mitigated most of the risk associated with it getting destroyed through time by the optimization, or you need to be prepared to evergreen it and you're always generating data. And this is why monitoring is in vogue at the moment. In part, is monitoring is a form of benchmarking that you can potentially evergreen and continually bring in live data to test for it. Trade-offs there abound as well, though. We need it all. There's defense in depth is another good term to go into, which I think you might have done a highlight on previously in one of your...
Yeah, the episode with Lilian, Blue Dot Impact, is going hard into the defense in depth framing, which I agree. I guess one thing that is maybe like a concern then of benchmarks, or like a critique of benchmarks, is that having these enables the sort of safety washing moral hazards for language model developers, because they can point to a safety evaluation that maybe doesn't have good longevity. Who knows that? And you can point to it and say, oh, truthful QA says that my model is truthful. And if you actually look at what was claimed by the authors, that's not at all what's being said. And therefore, like, the name is very problematic. But how do we square the fact that these artifacts that we're creating can be used to against us, essentially, in terms of our understanding?
So going back to the kind of market mode versus regulator mode, on the market side of things, people need reliable information about their systems. Like they Eventually you'll get to an ecosystem that provides reliable safety marks, reliable markers of trust. If a system is insurable, which it's something that landed in the last week, is a lot of the insurers are starting to exclude AI risk from their policies, which is
good.
Within the week before we recorded this interview, it was reported that multiple major insurers were seeking an exemption from the liabilities tied to use and deployment of AI systems. Now, to be fair, it seems that this is largely a hedging strategy. The insurers have applied for exemption but are not yet actively leveraging them. The original article, which broke the news, speculates that it will likely take a large-scale, systematic event for insurers to actually say, "No, wait, we didn't mean that." Regardless, this is a major signal for LLM developers and deployers. While they may have been counting on their insurance to pick up the tab in the event of a massive failure before, those insurers have made it clear that the current risk management practices seen in the AI space are insufficient for that kind of support. While I'm not one to cheer on big insurance, I do think most people would benefit if at least some portion of the lobbying dollars from them and big tech were wasted on each other. In other words, let them fight.
Yeah, it's an excellent development for a change thesis embedded within the market modality that the worst situation you can have with respect to risk is have uncertain assignment of that risk.
Yep.
And as that risk is devolving to the organizations that have the greatest decision-making authority with respect to the production of risk in the real world, then we have a greater capacity to adaptively respond to it and produce safer ecosystem. The other one is on the regulatory side of things. There's a variety of conformity requirements with standards, and something that I would like to see a lot more of, we'll see what happens, is a lot of more standards being written in code or in benchmarks, and then hopefully having those be stewarded in a manner that corrects for a lot of the problems that we identify in the BenchRisk paper. And we'll see on that front. I'm hoping that there's enough movement in enough different spaces that some of these outcomes will win out.
Yeah. I guess part of the reason that I'm interested in this space and I care so much about it is because whenever I think about it for too long, also, I just get this fire because I'm like, wait a second. We're saying, okay, let's do all this extra work, right? We're going to make sure that we're keeping the practices very explicit. We're specifying the purpose. We're specifying the scope and the assumptions and the information sources and how we're analyzing the model. And we're doing all of this to really make sure that what we're presenting is accurate and that we are giving appropriate caveats and that we are making claims which we can actually back up. And then we compare that to what's being done on the other side. We compare that to how language model developers are behaving. Also other systems, but I'm singling out the big language model developers because they're easier to single out and probably on a larger scale are affecting people negatively. But couldn't they have just done this to begin with? Couldn't they just be doing this testing internally? Couldn't they have solved these issues without us putting in essentially what is free labor? Why does it make sense that we are doing this, basically?
I don't think it's a satisfying answer, but the answer that I have on that question is effectively we are being guided by that invisible hand, thinking again about the hand in Super Smash Brothers, and that at every step along the way, when you're a startup, or it's weird to call them startups at this point, but they still have the startup operating mode, you're asking, do we have the luxury of doing this the way that it should be done? And they might not think about it explicitly in those terms, but you are always like a quarter away from irrelevancy and 2 quarters away from organizational death. And the kind of principles of evolution and whatnot exist in org space as well, of the ones that, way to beat they're bankrupt now. Like they've gone away, and it's not a satisfying thing. But the thing that I really react to in your statement is we just can't rely on everything to be done the right way at all times. Like we have to build either market or regulatory solutions to all of them, because there's too many people out there and there's too much ability to charge ahead. And so it's not a satisfying conclusion, but it's one that if you find enough fire in it on that front, you probably need to go to the regulatory camp, because that is there are clearer answers there, versus if you're in a company and you're employing 2 people or 2,000. All right, here's my choice. Do I do this and we stay alive, or do I not do this and I need to fire 2,000 people and it's all over? And we're all guided by that hand.
My solution is just to punish them for not doing it.
Smite them. Smite them, Jacob.
Yes. No, but actually, like with liability, with meaningful liability, I think that the problem solves itself.
Yeah. And among the greatest sins in the policy space and the regulatory space is when we've chosen to eliminate liability for things that there would be a market capacity to respond to in the presence of liability. So Section 230 and make it so that platforms are not liable for user content traded on them. Great in some respects. Like it actually has given us a great many positive things. But right now we're dealing with all the negatives on that front. And liability is among the most powerful forces in the universe.
Sean is referring to Section 230 of the United States Communications Act of 1934, which was introduced in 1996. That is the Section 230 part, not the rest of it. The excerpt, which is most important here, is no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. For those of us who don't speak legalese, that means exactly what Sean said. Online platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and the platform formerly known as Twitter are not being considered to be saying anything a user puts on their platform. In effect, this means they can't be held liable for this content in the same way that an individual could be. But there are many caveats here that also mean that those platforms don't just get a free pass. It was at this point that I became aware of a recent effort in Congress to, quote, reform, unquote, Section 230, and in turn realized there is way more here than I first thought. The argument against these policy efforts is legitimate. Doing so, as in reforming or rather repealing Section 230, will necessarily cause significant damage to online privacy and autonomy, and bolster censorship and, therefore, authoritarianism. Opposition to these efforts include the ACLU, Defending Rights and Dissent, and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF. While technically Section 230 has not yet been applied to generative AI in a legal setting, it is incredibly likely that a court will be asked to rule on this issue in the very near future. I even found a legal sidebar on congress.gov from earlier this month, December 2025, discussing precisely this. Honestly, this is a legitimately complex issue. I'm all for holding big tech accountable for the systems they create. But the way that it's been proposed seems to be unnecessarily stripping rights away from citizens. I strongly encourage you to look into this further yourself. Check out badinternetbills.com for the opposition, but also look at the arguments of those presenting the policies. A good starting point for the pro side is a Times article I'll also link in the show notes. There is a lot more to say here, but for now, let's get back to the interview.
And then, like, related to those things, we need to put out these works. We need to be sharing these, right? They're not going to do it, so we have to. But that also is opposing the need for that, like, information withholding that you were talking about for a good benchmark. So how do we square that? How do we balance that effectively for scientific progress and like the value of openness with the need for this sort of information security? And then also, does that mirror your thoughts on the open source, closed source for AI systems debate?
The market needs information about what is safe and unsafe, because people don't fly in airplanes if they think the airplane is likely to crash. And that's why a lot of the safety ecosystem built up around aviation is you don't have a commercial air service if you don't have aviation safety at the hand. And we have a variety of highly impactful, highly sought after market segments that AI wants to solve, but have more of a characteristic of planes crashing than we've really thought about at depth. Like legal aid being one example of that the practice of law is something that if people had greater access to it, we would correct one of the greatest economic injustices that we have in the country. There's a whole system of laws that's only accessible to people if they get hit by a car of someone that could be sued by an injury defense or an injury plaintiff's lawyer. And so you do have a market need for it. You do have a need to solve this problem of benchmarks are profoundly unreliable in a lot of instances. And that's an element of my work, is actually working with people in industry to try and define what a reliable benchmark is and to, in fact, build it and apply it across the whole industry, so that, coming back to the profit motive of companies, it doesn't make a whole lot of profit sense to invest in something that you can't differentiate your product on. If you don't have a good benchmark out there saying ours is safer, like we have a security operations center that has a ability to respond to jailbreaks inside a week and close each of those. You can't market your company based off of anything like that right now. Like, you don't have reliable information about those activities, and so investing in and producing good, reliable, long-lived benchmarking techniques gives the market an ability to solve these problems.
I did want to ask one more thing about the BenchRisk. So in the paper, in what you present, you say, ideally, what we would like to see is that benchmark authors self-score assessments, and they include that when we share these, knowing how many of these kinds of tools there are out there. Data sheets for data sets is an example that's from like 2021 or something like that. And there are tons of different frameworks that significantly improve what we can say about the data set or the benchmark that's being presented. And they're almost never used. And this seems like a bit unrealistic to me. And I'm curious what your thoughts are and like how your team went about thinking about this.
I think that the most important impact we can have out of the BenchRisk work is to provide a means for benchmarks that do aspire to evidence real-world decisions to indicate that somehow, and to be explicit about it, that this is a higher bar to clear than simply documenting it and whatnot. Because most of the documentation about benchmark standards that exist out there, they're just a useful way to capture and present what it is you've produced, and those are valuable and you need to produce those. And in fact, I think you actually score lower or less well on BenchRisk if you don't document it. But the truth of the matter is, very few benchmarks are aspiring to evidence real world decisions, and we're hoping to provide a guide towards that, a means to do that. And we're going to evaluate more benchmarks. We're going to score them, and we tried to prioritize a little bit on what's in the release documentation of these large language models.
Yeah,
and
makes sense.
So you can know which ones to go after. And I'm in it for the long haul. Like, this is not something we're going to be done talking about a year from now. This is an element of the effort that's going to last for 100 plus years, is figuring out how to measure and expose this information. And so this is a powerful tool in that effort.
Gotcha. Yeah. You should do a truthful QA, because I bet it would score extremely poorly. But talking about like impacting real world decisions, real world things, if someone does want to impact things, does want to make changes, there are also other ways that they can do that. And one that you've decided recently to start, maybe not super recently because you've been working on it for a little while, but you are starting a group or working with a group that has just started called AVERI, which is a frontier auditing nonprofit. What is your reasoning for why you're doing this? And tell us just a little bit about, how this came about, why you're doing it, what your mode of impact or your theory of impact is.
So AVERI stands for AI Verification and Evaluation Research Institute, and it's heavily inspired by a fairly long history of audit, which most commonly is known as being applied in the financial sector, where you need an organization to come in and say, do we trust that these financial statements are representative of reality? And you can detect a little bit of this rhymes with a lot of things we've been talking about today of, do we actually trust the forms of evidence? Do we trust the representations that are being made? And how do we move towards a greater and greater sense of assurance over these things that are being claimed on systems? And this really does serve both the market and the regulator side of things. The audit in a market context in financial statements is something that lets people invest in organizations. There's some famous accounting scandals, Enron being a good example of years past, that actually resulted in the more or less a death sentence for the auditor associated with that organization. And that is something that they were more or less sacrificed, is the way that people in accounting sometimes talk about it, because they're like, we have to trust the results of audits because like the whole financial ecosystem is premised on trust, and this is an important element for it. So that serves the market side of things. There's also the really big risk side of things that government takes an interest in, that you need organizations to go in and say, hey, this system is capable of very highly scaled cyber attacks, wreaking a lot of havoc across the digital ecosystem. We would really like that not to be the case. And we also know it's super hard to arrive at a sense of it's close to impossible. So let's work with these outside evaluation and verification organizations towards that. So AVERI is engaged in trying to figure out like what is an audit, like in this space as a like first principle, and trying to get that standardized in some form where we use the consistent language surrounding it, and then developing the methodological basis that an activity like that can be carried out. We've had double entry bookkeeping for centuries. We've had large language models for 5 years. So there's a lot for us to figure out here. And is also, no offense to the 700,000 CPAs in the United States, but it is like a little bit simpler than like a system that can also do accounting and fly a plane. And
I wouldn't trust an LLM to fly a plane, but I do get what you're saying.
Don't put ideas in people's heads. Like you're gonna see something in the next month, and it's gonna be this person hooked an LLM into making flight control decisions, and we'll see whether they intervene before it hits the ground. But yeah, it's the everything problem, and the curious task of AI safety is to figure out how to go from the capability to specific risk, and how to map between those.
Okay. And so this is a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And so how are you getting funded? Asking for a friend.
Primarily private individuals and philanthropies. That's the majority of the funding. There's debates on how such organizations are funded in the long term. And this is something that we actually grapple with on the AI incident database as well, of having independence as an asset. It's also a liability financially and whatnot. It's a little bit harder to proceed. But the reason for being a nonprofit is your decisions and your reason for doing that nonprofit are pretty clear. Everyone involved in AVERI could make more money by doing something that's not AVERI. There's fortunes being won and lost out there at the moment. So you can have a greater sense of trust in the organization as a result of saying, we don't get the profit share. The thing that makes a nonprofit isn't that you don't get paid, although often that is the case.
I was going to say, I don't know. It's like that.
It really feels like that. It's that you don't get to take more than like a normal schedule wage for it. It's all the money, all the excess funds that you bring in need to be deployed to the purpose. You don't get to say, here's a special dividend to all the employees. You did very well last year, and you're now a decamillionaire or something. And that is very important when you're looking to serve the public interest, is to have a sense of you cannot be corrupted by X amount of money coming in. Because if that money came in that's and it ultimately compromised the purpose, like, why are you doing this? Like, just go make money. There are better ways to make money than to compromise the purpose to which you're engaged in.
Yeah. So basically, the reason you're a nonprofit is so you can pay your employees less. I'm just kidding.
Nah, it's so that you can't bribe them to forget about their purpose. And I think a good example on this is Juul, the e-cig, the vaping.
Like the vape thing?
Yeah, and look at their organizational history, and it's really sad because, like, they started off legitimately, at least a good portion of them, bought into the wear a smoking cessation aid. And that is like a true thing. This is a dual-use technology that can be addictive and be unhealthy to people, and it can also help people stop being addicted and stop being unhealthy. But the problem is the addiction side of that equation is a lot more profitable than the smoking cessation side of things, because eventually you also stop using the smoking cessation aid. And so eventually they were purchased by, I think, Philip Morris, and they all got really great payouts. But if you were there for the smoking cessation aid side of things, that's not going to feel great. Being a nonprofit means you can't do that.
No, I strongly believe that, like, in the importance of having organizations like that. And so I'm trying to pull out more reasoning from you by saying that. But then, okay, so we've got this sort of, we don't want to be, I guess, slave to the profit incentive. But then you also have, you can still be corporate friendly. And so ML Commons, which is a group that you've worked with, I know is very corporate friendly, I would say. And so I'm curious, like, you have to be corporate friendly, right? If you're being a frontier model auditing sort of group. But at the same time, how do you define, are people who are currently participating or currently employees of frontier model companies allowed to be part of your working groups? And, like, how does that work? And how do you make sure it doesn't create a scenario where there is private interest that's trying to undercut research, even if maybe not trying, but just is undercutting research?
So the ML Commons is a business league. It's a 501c6. It's also a nonprofit, but it's a different kind of nonprofit. And that distinction is quite important for understanding orgs that are out there. I've been affiliated with 501c 3, 4, 6, 9. I'm trying to get the whole 501c section of the tax code. I almost have the bingo card.
7, basically.
I've done 7 is for you, right? I think
it's a dumb joke. Don't worry about it. Please continue.
So I almost have the whole thing. And the reason I like ML Commons as an organization is that comment I made earlier of business needs reliable measurement in order for business to sell products. And ML Commons is a bunch of engineers that care about measurement. And they want to do it right. They get angry when suggestions of that would produce too much variance and too wide of confidence intervals come into play, and that's just something that I regard as, these are my people trying to chart the path inside industry. The org has to measure across the whole industry. It has to produce the best measurements it can, and it's interested in maintaining benchmarks for long periods of time as something that is standardizing the practice of measurement in the space. Mm-hmm. And so I just love the alignment of interests. I think that we very much need orgs like this And if you go back in history in the development of other safety organizations, you'll see that very often there is this relationship between industry and the kind of NGO supervisory mechanisms that get stood up.
But then there are also for-profit ones, right? So there are also auditors that are for-profits doing the similar things to what you're proposing to do with AVERI. And an issue, like a conflict of interest there, is that as soon as there is meaningful legislation in place, the services that you are offering skyrocket in value. Mm-hmm. How does, maybe not AVERI because AVERI is a nonprofit, but like how do people in this space reckon with this conflict of interest? And do you think this should be resolved? If so, like how?
The way that this works in financial audits, because financial auditors are for-profit organizations, they're very often partnerships. And it happens there if you put out an audit that is, let's say you just don't show up and you like issue the audit findings. Oh, the financial statements are all good. You can put all your money in there. They're doing great. Then it subsequently comes out like there was no money in those bank accounts. Like it didn't exist. And as an auditor, you actually have tremendous liability for having put out a fraudulent audit.
Okay.
You have a carrot to be dishonest, and you have a stick to
keep you in line.
And that seems to work adequately in the financial space. There are cases where there are failings, but it carries you pretty far. So there are ways of ensuring the integrity of a for-profit auditor. At that point of the development of audit for AI, we have not defined a profession that is AI auditor to any adequate degree that it would make sense to engage in the for-profit auditing of systems. I think, speaking for myself at least, we want that to exist. Like we think it has to exist in some form. That activity is predominantly carried out by publicly funded nonprofit operators or for-profit ones. I have a preference to one of those over the other, but neither exists right now. And a collection of aspirants that I'm hoping to be and enable. And it does exist at this moment. It's just not nearly enough.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I know we got to wrap up. I want to ask at least the one question that I ask everyone, which is, what is your favorite part about what you do?
My favorite part of what I do is that it has a sense of this is the question of our time, that we have to figure out how to navigate this problem, and that we're all in this together, like all of humanity. We're factious and there are issues, but broadly we're seeing more change more quickly than humanity's ever seen, and we're all in this ship together, and that there is that sense of shared purpose.
Awesome. Yeah, Sean, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to get this episode together, and I really appreciate you joining me and having the time.
It's been great talking with you, Jacob, and great show, and really a fantastic beard. I have to say, I love your beard.
Thank you. Yeah. I think when we first met, you mentioned something about if you're going to make it super corporate, you might need to shave that. And I was like, not going to happen.
Yeah. And I love the conviction of the answer on that front. And I wish I could grow a beard like yours. Like, I just can't. I don't have it in me.
Yeah. It's definitely genetics is a big portion of it. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I will let you get to where you're going.
Okay. Thank you, Jacob. It's been a pleasure, and keep in touch. Hopefully see you in San Diego.
And that's all we have for today. It is worth noting that I have it on high authority AVERI will be hiring for positions once they launch in January of 2026. Regardless, if you're interested in this kind of thing, it's probably worth checking out their listings, as you'd have Sean as your superior, and I know the kind of work environment he strives for is the kind that I, at least, would want. If you like the show, please share it with your friends on social media. If you tag me or Kairos FM, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Anyways, hope you're all having an excellent holiday break. 'Tis the season. Now we just need to figure out if it's summer or winter.